Gdansk, late autumn, room 7. A patient placed a folded city map face down on my table and slid it to the edge until it hovered. The keycard system later showed he had entered the floor 2 minutes before the doors officially unlocked. A maintenance note recorded the janitor closet on this floor found locked from the inside that same hour. Ethics forms waited for my initials in a sealed envelope. Patterns hide in ordinary rooms. But before we dive in, subscribe if you value careful, evidence-driven stories from the therapy room. I trained in clinical psychology and took the longer road into forensic work after spending early years in a community clinic that saw too many rushed assessments and too many missed alarms. The court liaison role led me to risk formulations for violent offenders, then to supervising younger therapists who sat with raw stories and tried to stay present without either collapsing or hardening. My days were a rotation. Early case reviews before the building stirred, morning intakes, midday supervision, afternoon-long sessions with those permitted extended time, late documentation while the cleaners moved through the halls. I had come to trust quiet routines. The hum of the old air purifier in room 7, the clatter from the metal cart when facilities refilled paper goods, the warm plastic smell of the session timer. Into that dependable rhythm, my new patient stepped and rearranged the air. He arrived with no lawyer, no family, no referral letter beyond a templated line that he sought help for insomnia and agitated thoughts. He was late 30s by appearance, dressed like a warehouse supervisor, nails trimmed close with small fissures along the sides. He insisted upon late-day slots, requested the same chair, and set his watch upon the table exactly aligned with the edge. The first thing that reached me was the citrus bleach smell. Not the light, hospital-grade clean I associated with end-of-day mopping, but a sharper, almost sweetened chemical sting that outlasted his presence by a full hour. When he crossed his ankles, rubber soles squeaked in a way the room had never amplified before, the sound catching on the linoleum like a small protest. In the intake, I noted flat effect with sudden bursts of precise detail when he described the routes he walked to fall asleep. He named streets, turns, and underpasses with a care I usually heard in hikers or postal workers. No dialogue passed between us that would violate his privacy here. What matters is the pattern. He returned to water again and again, canals, culverts, rain gutters that emptied near the shipyards. He inserted phrases about quiet places where city sounds thinned. He disliked dusk, preferred full dark or full daylight. My first impossible observation came the third session. The city had endured intermittent rain. He entered dry, but with cuffs faintly damp and that citrus bleach smell stronger than before. He described a dream that featured a metal grate and a white shoe lodged in silt. That same morning, a bulletin in the staff kitchen mentioned a person missing near a tram stop by the shipyards, last seen wearing white trainers. The bulletin was generic, nothing about silt or grates. Correlation is a temptation machine in forensic practice. Still, I wrote in the progress note, imagery specificity exceeded typical thematic content. Progress note, Session 3, late October, timestamp late afternoon. Observed, patient presented with mild dermal redness around nail beds. Olfactory note of strong lemonated bleach. Reported sleep onset routine involving long walks along water management routes. Risk screen unchanged from prior, low moderate. Intervention, grounding exercise, micro goal set for reducing rumination. The citrus bleach motif returned with minor variations. Some days it was faint, a ghost on fabric. Some days it stung the eyes. When I used clinic sanitizer between sessions, it smelled different, thinner, more floral. The distinction grew so familiar I could tell whether he had waited near the door before entry. The facility's requisition list showed an unusual order for high-strength disinfectant after a weekend incident of graffiti in the stairwell. I learned this because the metal cart rattled past my office and the order sheet lay on top, and I am human and curious and careful. The brand matched the scent that followed him. Initial counter-hypotheses formed. He might work somewhere that made him smell this way, or soothe anxiety with cleaning rituals that left residue. He might be repeating true crime scenes he consumed online, dressing them in sensory detail that felt personal but was borrowed. My own risk lens might be primed by recent consults with probation on high-profile cases. To test for contamination from media, I kept my questions neutral, my interventions concrete, and my session structure stable. I adjusted the schedule to bring him in earlier one week, under the pretense of clinician availability, to see whether dusk proximity mattered. He arrived exactly on time, as always, and placed his watch in its ritual spot. The citrus bleach odor was gentler. He described inland routes away from the docks. A folded map entered the story without fanfare. I found it in the waiting room afterward. The edges softened, one crease nearly split. The routing marks were red pencil, not ink, and they traced footpaths that paralleled service roads. Several loops circled culverts and fenced drainage basins. The map was public print quality, nothing proprietary. I brought it to the front desk. The receptionist logged it as found, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and the sleeve went into a locked drawer. That night I dreamt of red circles that tightened like tourniquets. Front desk lost and found log. Late October evening entry. Item: folded map of city industrial zones. Condition: worn red pencil marks in semicircular patterns near water management sites. Retrieval: none recorded as of end of month. I stepped into supervision with a junior colleague and used a composite case frame to protect confidentiality while still pressure testing my thinking. The colleague stressed caution. Do not let pattern hunger outweigh ethics. Do not collapse incidental matches into narrative necessity. I agreed aloud and still went back to my notes, feeling the old tug between oath and alarm. Facilities notified staff of a door issue on our floor. A janitor closet refused to open during a morning inspection and later swung free without resistance. The memo was routine. Doors stick, keys misalign. But the timing etched itself in my head because it overlapped with the day he arrived before the official opening. The citrus bleach smell had felt concentrated in the corridor that morning, as if it had nowhere to dissipate. Facilities incident memo, early November morning. Subject: custodial closet latch intermittently sticking. Resolved without intervention. Note: scheduled review of door hardware. Cleaning supply count matched requisition. The stakes clarified themselves as I listed them. If I was wrong, I would harm a client who had come for help with sleep and intrusive thoughts, branding him with suspicion my notes could not erase. If I was right and did nothing, I would be complicit in looking away. The clinic's duty to warn policy required imminent, identifiable risk. I did not have that. I had smells, roots, cuffs that dampened on dry days, and a folded map with red arcs. I had a flat effect that briefly warmed when he described darkness as clean. I had my own heart rate rising when the session timer neared its end, and he aligned his watch with the table edge as if measuring not minutes but control. I expanded the test plan. I would introduce a standardized imagery exercise to see whether he produced water and metal without prompting. I would vary room selection once, shifting from room 7 to the smaller room 3, farther from the stairwell and without the faint drafts he sometimes mentioned. I would log every olfactory note, every squeak of sole on floor, every instance of cuffs damp when the city air stayed dry. I would consult the clinic's legal advisor anonymously about hypotheticals. and I would watch for the one thing duty to warn demanded: a clear, actionable target of harm. The first imagery exercise produced exactly what I feared, and exactly what a skeptic would expect. Water, metal, a quiet place where sounds thinned. He added a smell he called lemon sharpness without prompting. He did not blink when I shifted rooms the following week, but the citrus bleach smell arrived with him, not with the walls. I closed the day with a walk of my own. The city's canals took light poorly in late autumn. They swallowed and kept it. I counted turns from the clinic to the tram, then to the shipyard fringe, an old habit to ground myself. Counting helps many people. It helped me remind myself that evidence is not a feeling. And yet, when the tram clattered over a grate, I felt the map in my pocket, its red arcs pressing through the plastic sleeve where the receptionist had placed it back in my hands, asking whether it might belong to my client. That night, I wrote the question in my private reflection log, the one I kept to separate fear from fact. If a pattern exists only because I am in the room with him, what does that mean for the people who are not? I set out to break my own pattern. The first change was the room. I moved him from room 7 to room 3, a smaller space with an older carpet and no linoleum squeak to amplify foot shifts. Facilities confirmed the vents in 3 had been cleaned the prior week and that no citrus products had been used in that zone since summer. He arrived, placed the watch at its edge-aligned spot, and the air sharpened the moment he exhaled. The smell was unchanged. When he crossed his ankles, the floor offered only a soft drag, yet I still heard a ghost of rubber against surface, a tiny protest that seemed to come more from the soles themselves than from any room. To control for environmental carryover, I asked scheduling to stagger my afternoon so that a colleague used room 7 before and after his slot, while I remained in 3. The colleague later reported no unusual odors, no residue on the chair arms, just the ordinary drift of hand gel and printer toner. I wiped both rooms myself with the clinic's unscented wipes at day's end. Citrus bleach belonged only to his wake. I started a ledger that I did not keep in the electronic record. It was a private grid of days, weather, his presentation, and small notes that had no home in a formal risk tool. I added city incidents as they were posted to staff boards or came up in whispered summaries between sessions. A missing jogger near a canal mouth, an abandoned bicycle against a fence near a culvert, a shoe retrieved by a dog on a river path. The ledger was not evidence. It was temptation shaped into lines so I could see it and tell myself not to trust it. Even so, his late-day sessions seemed to correlate with nights when the city held its breath. I reminded myself that late day simply aligned with when people vanished most often, after work, before home. I ran simple falsification steps that fit inside therapy. I shifted session length down by 5 minutes one week, then up by 5 the next, to see whether his arrival and departure felt rigid or adaptive. He adjusted without comment, aligning the watch each time as if the ritual mattered more than duration. I stopped offering water. He never asked and never drank. I watched the cuffs. On dry days, they were sometimes damp. On wet days, they were sometimes bone dry, as if he had changed in a place with a different climate. He never carried a bag. Personal pattern ledger, mid-November entries. Session moved to room 3. Olfactory note, strong lemon cleaner odor present on clothing, chairs, and doorknob after contact. Colleague in room 7 reports no unusual scent the same day. Weather. Intermittent showers at noon, dry at dusk. City staff board. Bulletin about bicycle near culvert. No person located yet. To keep my reasoning clean, I put formal structure around the informal. I used a well-known risk checklist with items about past violence, current stressors, and future management. He scored low on declared history, low-moderate on current coping rigidity, and moderate on access to vulnerable settings, though that last item strained the tool's intent, and I knew it. I added a sleep log exercise, inviting him to track bedtime and waking with a simple chart. He complied with near-perfect rows that showed late starts and earlier rises than he described. The lines were too straight, the same hand pressure across days, as if copied. I asked him to include approximate routes walked before sleep. He drew loops near water with neat arrows pointing toward drains and culverts. The loops were tidy. Drains are not tidy. Sleep routine worksheet, week 1. Reported bedtime late night, wake very early morning, consistent across days. Pre-sleep routes diagrammed as loops by water channels in industrial zones. Pen pressure uniform, no corrections. Comment, imagery, precision remains high. Institutional pressures accumulated like small stones in a pocket. Our legal advisor sent a clinic-wide note reviewing duty-to-warn thresholds and confidentiality limits after a national case reached the news. My supervisor asked, in a neutral check-in about caseload balance, whether I was keeping my forensic and therapeutic roles distinct. A probation officer with whom I had worked for years mentioned that a task force had formed quietly to review disappearances along drainage lines. Nothing official yet. Just analysts looking for structure amid noise. I did not bring my composite case to that conversation. I carried it back to my notes and shoved it hard against the lines I had drawn. Facilities' requisition pattern shifted. The brand of disinfectant I had associated with the citrus bleach smell was replaced, a cost-saving change explained in a memo. The new product was lemon-free. 2 days later, he returned with the old scent stronger than ever. Not a faint drift, but a dense, eye-stinging cloud that made my skin feel tight around the knuckles. The memo lay on my desk, and the contradiction sat next to it like a fact that refused to yield. Facilities email, mid-November. Subject: change to fragrance-free disinfectant in all clinic areas effective immediately. Note: dispose of remaining scented products. Observation: patient session same afternoon with marked citrus bleach odor, consistent with prior brand. I extended the falsification attempts beyond room and timing. I prepositioned a fresh, unscented cloth on the chair arm he favored and folded it so that any transfer might leave a mark. After he left, the cloth felt stiff along its edge, as if it had been brushed by something that dried fast. There was a faint yellowing where the fold had met the chair. I logged it and threw it away. I kept thinking of the janitor closet that had locked from within and later swung open, and I disliked the feeling of my own imagination inserting itself into a routine facilities glitch. A week later, the ledger gained a new column: storage lots. A colleague's partner worked in logistics and mentioned that several small, abandoned units along an old railway spur had recently been cleared by the city, and behind rusted shutters they found drains cut into concrete floors. She said this like a sad urban note, not as a lead. I added it to the grid and felt foolish while doing it. I was a therapist, not a detective. My sessions with him took on a mechanical cadence broken by sudden insertions of fine-grained imagery. He would sit in silence, hands still, then describe a sensation of cold on the shins as if standing in shallow water. His heart rate band rarely spiked. The session timer would near its end, and he would align the watch. The smell would say lemon and something harsher beneath, a note of undiluted concentrate. I introduced a standardized imagery script that began in a forest path and moved toward a meadow, a routine tool to steer minds away from ruminative ruts. He steered it toward water without prompting, describing in halting fragments the way sounds quiet when air empties over an open grate. I documented carefully, keeping adjectives out of the record. He left at the hour. The corridor held the citrus bleach like a fog. Session imagery notes, late November. Standardized neutral script attempted. Patient redirects to watercourse imagery with mention of grate and sound attenuation. Physiological observation. Steady breathing, no tremor in hands. Post-session environment. Persistent citrus bleach odor in corridor. The pivotal event arrived when the city's analysts stepped beyond rumor. A liaison contacted our director to request any community-sourced observations about unusual patterns near water management infrastructure. It was framed as a general public safety inquiry. The director forwarded the note to supervisors, who forwarded it to clinicians, who were instructed to respect confidentiality, but to consult legal if any client details intersected. The word intersected did the quiet harm. It lodged between ethics and alarm and made a bridge where there had previously been a gap. The same day, a press bulletin described a find along a drainage canal. Not a person, but a bag of clothing weighted with scrap. Among the items was a pair of white trainers. The bulletin mentioned no identifying marks. The ledger line across that day already held a narrow entry noting his cuffs had been dry despite heavy rain, and that the citrus bleach smell felt fresh, not stale. I closed the notebook and stared at the corridor until the air seemed to pulse. I requested a consult with legal, framed as a hypothetical about a client whose imagery and routines overlapped with public safety concerns without direct threat. The legal advisor was careful and thorough, laying out the elements that would trigger a breach. Imminent harm to a specific person or group, a plan, access, and intent. I had access without declared plan. I had ritual without overt intent. I had smell. I had cuffs. I did not have what policy demanded. The advisor reminded me of procedures for anonymous tips through public channels should I feel burdened by coincidence. That night, I wrote a single line in my reflection log. Anonymous is still a breach if it is me. The next session he did not arrive. The front desk noted no cancellation. The corridor had no lemon sting. The chair arms stayed clean under my hand. I tried to let relief in and could not. An hour later, the front desk called to say a person had asked whether anyone had inquired about a folded city map left weeks ago. The caller did not leave a name and disconnected before transfer. The receptionist had logged the call time and placed a note on the lost and found sleeve. Front desk call log, early December. Caller asked about folded industrial zone map left in waiting area in late autumn. No name. Call ended before transfer. Note attached to map sleeve. No retrieval scheduled. He returned the following day at a different hour, claiming a schedule shift in a murmured phrase I will not reproduce. His watch still aligned with the table. His cuffs were damp in an otherwise dry day. The citrus bleach smell struck hard enough that my eyes watered. He asked to keep the same room as prior, which was now 7 again. He sat. He stilled. He described a new sleep routine, shorter walks, more straight lines, fewer loops. He called it efficiency in a flat tone that sounded like a remembered lesson rather than an internal decision. I closed the session and went directly to the director. I described, without embellishment, the recurrent odor, the water-focused imagery, the map, the off-hour arrival, the locked closet incident, and my failed attempts to falsify through room, timing, and environment. I presented my ledger, then slid it back before it could become part of the official record. I requested permission to contact the liaison with a generalized alert about suspicious patterns near water infrastructure. The director asked legal to join and reply. The reply took the form of a careful reminder that clinicians are not investigators, and that any outreach must avoid details that could identify a client. It also included the sentence that shifted something in me. If a clinician believes there is reasonable cause to suspect ongoing harm, the clinician may contact law enforcement and provide minimal necessary information. That night, a storage unit near the old rail spur caught fire. The local report listed it as accidental, cause under review. The next morning, the task force liaison called the clinic directly, not through the director, requesting a list of recent clients who reported obsessive cleaning rituals, exposure to industrial chemicals, or work near municipal facilities. The request landed with weight. Privacy law blocked any direct list. The director declined properly. The liaison then asked whether any clinician had observations relevant to patterns at water sites, and, if so, to contact the task force through a dedicated line. I made the call. I reported, without name, that a person fitting adult male range exhibited persistent citrus bleach odor not accounted for by clinic products, recurred with imagery of grates and culverts, and showed rigid timekeeping aligned with late-day movements. I provided approximate hours, not dates. I mentioned the map without saying where it had been found. I hung up and felt my throat tighten as if the room had less air to spare. 2 days later, the police asked the clinic for records pursuant to a lawful request. The name on the request matched the one on my intake. The task force had linked badge data from industrial sites with camera captures near drains and with step count logs scraped from a fitness app that synced to a public feed the person had forgotten to lock. They had also collected fibers and chemical traces from the interiors of drainage covers. The citrus bleach solvent ratio matched a concentrate used by a closed warehouse. The phrasing was dry, the implication heavy. I turned over the minimal required notes under legal supervision and felt my stomach turn at the idea that a therapy room had been used as a way station in a private itinerary. Lawful records request, early December. Basis: ongoing investigation into disappearances near water management infrastructure. Attached summary notes describe linkage of site access badges, public fitness data, and chemical trace analysis consistent with concentrated cleaner. Subject identified as my client. Clinic provided minimal records under counsel. I believed the pattern had broken because now it was in the open. The rule in my head said that once a pattern is named, it loses power. I was wrong. The evening after the records transfer, a person went missing from a bus stop near a park far from canals, far from drains, a place of wide lawns and dry ground. There was no water within easy reach. The report mentioned a faint chemical smell noticed by a passerby, who led officers to a waste bin where a lemon-scented wipe had been discarded. The wipe brand did not match our stock. I sat at my desk, and the air in the corridor grew sharp with citrus, even though by then he was in custody. The protocol I had lived by, the one that held my roles apart and my ethics intact, leaned under a weight I had not felt before. If the smell could arrive without him, then either my senses had turned traitor, or the pattern extended beyond one person, or the investigation had branched and I did not know how to hold my part of it anymore. The session timer on my desk blinked its steady light. The watch-sized circle on the table edge looked like an absence. I pressed my palms flat and listened for the faint squeak of rubber that used to follow him. The building was silent. The lemon sting remained. Custody changed the air, but it did not quiet it. With him held, the corridor still carried the lemon sting on days when no cleaner had passed and no carts rattled by. My first reaction was that my senses had turned unreliable under stress. The missing person from the park deepened that doubt. The wipe found near the bench belonged to a brand the clinic had never stocked. If the smell could appear without him and beyond his usual routes, then either the pattern belonged to something larger, or I had been mapping a mind onto a city that did not care about my maps. The task force request for records pulled me from the privacy of therapy into the clarity of chain of custody language. Dates were written in full. Times were rounded. Notes were parsed for concrete content. The investigator summaries, paraphrased during legal handover, described badge pings at odd hours near drains, public fitness data left unsecured, and chemical ratios that matched concentrated cleaner used at a shuttered warehouse. Read like that? In the flat light of evidence, the pattern looked clean and singular. Yet the park case refused the frame. Dry ground, no drains. A lemon wipe discarded in a bin with no connection to our clinic stock. The quiet logic I had counted on was fracturing. I asked facilities for a meeting. The director approved on the condition that I stayed within my lane. We stood with the supervisor beside the ventilation closet and traced the route of air through the floor. Room 7 and Room 3 pulled from one branch. The janitor closet vented to another. In normal operation, there would be negative pressure in therapy rooms to keep odors from drifting out. On nights when the system cycled at low power, pressures could reverse in short bursts as dampers readjusted. The supervisor said this as a minor operational note. I heard it as a hypothesis. On certain nights, the air might carry traces from the service shaft into the corridor and rooms, independent of any person. I needed more than a hunch. Environmental Health loaned us passive sampling badges, simple discs that absorb volatile compounds and later show what they captured. We placed one on the underside of the table in Room 7, one in the corridor near the door frame, and one in the ventilation closet. We set a simple plan: leave them for a week, then send to the lab. I logged the placement time in longhand, resisting the urge to wrap it in the language of therapy. This was building science, not risk formulation. Environmental sampling log. Placement, therapy room. 7, underside of table, corridor door frame, ventilation closet intake. Duration, 1 work week. Objective, detect presence and pattern of lemon-scented cleaner aldehydes and carrier solvents. Notes: no clinic use of lemon products during period per facility's memo. He was still in custody during that week. The lemon odor still appeared on 2 afternoons and 1 early morning. One afternoon aligned with a short power dip that flickered lights and made the old air purifier buzz. The early morning followed a night when a storm had pushed salt air inland and humidity rose. I wrote both notes without assigning meaning. I left the building and found that my coat retained a faint sting that persisted even after airing outdoors. That night, I walked my dog by the small park far from canals. The air smelled of damp soil. A city worker emptied a bin into a truck. I saw a crumpled, lemon-branded wipe near the truck's wheel and felt my stomach twist at the way evidence can be everywhere once you start looking for it. The lab's report arrived with clear lines. The table badge had captured small but consistent traces of the lemon aldehyde, not every day, but clustered around the 2 afternoons of notable smell. The corridor badge showed higher peaks on those same afternoons and a faint rise on the early morning. The ventilation closet badge carried the strongest signal. The ratio of aldehyde to carrier matched the old brand discontinued by facilities. That meant someone still used it in the building or stored it in a way that allowed vapor escape into the shaft. Facilities checked storage. An older, half-used container sat on the high shelf in the service closet, left there during the changeover. No conspiracy, just a missed bottle in a busy month. Environmental lab summary. Finding: lemon-scented aldehyde present in room 7 and corridor samples with highest concentration in ventilation closet sample. Temporal clustering aligned with reported odor incidents. Ratio matched discontinued cleaner brand. Facilities action: removal and disposal of remaining old product. Inspection of vents. The findings explained part of what I had sensed. They did not explain the park case. They did not explain the stiffness in the cloth I had prepositioned under his hand, or his cuffs damp on dry days, or the way his drawings favored loops around drains. They did not explain the janitor closet latch that had locked from within, and they did not explain why the lemon sting had met me like a wall on the day after the records transfer. Then an update slid across the director's desk and into my hands under legal supervision. Case coordination note from task force. Status: subject remained in custody. Secondary incident at park identified a different individual on camera purchasing lemon wipes at a convenience store nearby several hours prior. The wipe brand matched that purchase. No shared employment or residence with subject. DNA on the wipe inconclusive due to handling. I felt relief and dread at once. Relief that the park case did not map cleanly onto my client. Dread that the smell had become a sign others could adopt. Copying can be spontaneous. It can also be taught. The analysts had overlaid my city map with municipal pump schedules and found that the red arcs I had stared at late into the night matched not high-flow times, but the brief shutdown windows when maintenance could safely stand near drains. That indicated insider knowledge. The list of people with that knowledge was not long, but it was not a single name. Contractors, seasonal hires, a float pool of maintenance workers, supervisors who filled in when crews were thin. My client had carried keys in his mind long before the badge data confirmed proximity. Analyst overlay summary. Red pencil arcs on recovered city map align with published and unpublished pump downtime windows. Inference. Schedule familiarity. Candidate pool includes municipal staff and contracted maintenance, not dispositive to a single person. I moved through the aftermath like a person learning to walk again. The clinic changed policy in small but firm ways. We added a field in progress notes for environmental observations, not to hunt patterns, but to document when scents, sounds, or textures might affect a session. We bought fragrance-free products and inspected storage monthly. We opened a channel to legal for anonymous consultations that allowed clinicians to describe pattern-level concerns without identifiers, to be triaged by counsel instead of by the anxious part of a therapist's brain. I began to sit with colleagues more often, bringing composite cases earlier, spreading the weight of worry across more hands. At home, the smell chased me even after facilities removed the old container. I would reach for a towel and catch a lemon edge that was not there a minute before. I would step in my kitchen and hear the faint protest of rubber that did not match the floor beneath me. I went to a physician to rule out sinus causes. The examination was uneventful. The conclusion was simple. Stress can teach the senses to overinterpret. I wrote that sentence in my reflection log and looked at it until it felt like both a comfort and an alibi. He entered the court system on a path that would not return him to my room. The charges were not mine to recount. What belonged to me was the chain of small decisions. When I moved rooms, when I placed a cloth, when I made the call, when I held back a detail, when I asked for a lab test rather than another supervision hour. Those choices built a scaffold under a set of facts that might otherwise have broken apart under heat and fear. The city's winter arrived with hard light upon the canals and a cleaner edge to the air. The corridor in the clinic smelled of printer toner and wool coats. Without the old bottle in the service closet, the lemon sting faded. The squeak of rubber returned to being only what shoes do on linoleum. It would have been easy to call that closure, to let the senses stand down and declare the lesson learned. Then the task force shared a final coordination note through legal. Consolidated timeline. Primary subject's key card. History showed pauses that matched days when a second badge, issued to a temporary worker, pinged near the same drains. The two badges never scanned together. The temporary worker left the city at the start of winter. A storage lot fire had destroyed potential shared tools. No witness statements, no confession. Pattern incomplete. Ambiguity settled where certainty had failed to grow. Perhaps there had been two actors who never stood in the same room. Perhaps one watched and taught, and the other learned and acted. Perhaps a wider pool of people shared the same knowledge, and only some stepped across the line between thought and harm. The Park case still lay aside, a separate branch or an echo. My role was never to solve, only to notice and to act within the limits of noticing. Even so, the mind wants a finish line. I returned to room 7 on a day when the building was quiet and the harbor wind had died. I set the table back by a hand's width so the leg did not catch the heater grill. I placed the folded map that had been returned after analysis on the table and aligned its edge to the line where he had once aligned his watch. The sampler discs had been removed weeks before. The underside was clean. I sat without starting the session timer and listened to the room. The air was plain and human. The chair arms were just wood. The table smelled faintly of paper and soap. The recurring motif had become an empty frame, and I saw how much I had filled it. I wrote a letter to myself and slid it into my private log. I promised to keep using the tools that slowed me down: structured risk checks, environmental notes, supervision, legal consults before intuition turned to action. I promised to ask for air sampling rather than trust my nose when the stakes rose. I promised to bring maps to analysts early and to accept that sometimes the red arcs align by chance, and sometimes they do not, and that the difference cannot be forced. The last image I hold is not a face or a corridor, but a measurement. Environmental Health sent a final graph from a new week of sampling after the old cleaner had been removed. The line sat near baseline for days, then rose gently on a morning when a contractor used a personal lemon-scented wipe in the ventilation closet, and then fell again. It was not a spike, not an alarm, just proof that the air is a carrier and the building breathes through us as much as we breathe within it. That graph reframed my first weeks with him. What I had smelled may have been him. It may also have been the building. It was both and neither in any given hour. I left the map on the shelf with a label that read simply, "Returned." I closed the door to room 7 and heard only the ordinary click of a well-maintained latch. The corridor held its usual mix of paper, wool, and the light ozone from old electronics. I stood there, counting my breaths the way I teach clients who need something to hold when numbers become frightening. And I knew that the question I owed the work was not whether I had been right or wrong, but how I would act the next time a smell, a routine, and a map began to align. The evidence forces this single, concrete question that I now keep at the front of every file. When a sensory trace could be building artifact or predatory habit, which precise threshold in my notes compels me to notify law enforcement without waiting for proof that may arrive too late?